It's time to add some light to our scene. We just have default lighting currently. I want to bring the timeline down to a point where the ball is somewhat close to the ground plane, but not actually on it, so we can see shadows. And tap the space bar to go out to the 4 viewport layout. Maybe position the perspective view a bit. Dolly out a bit in the top view too. And we want to create at least 2 lights, really, in any situation. We want to have a key light, which is going to be the dominant source of illumination, and a fill light, which is the ambience or the bounce light. If this is an outdoor scene, then we can use a directional light for the sun and an ambient light for the sky or the environment. Go to the Create menu and choose Lights, and we'll make a directional light. It'll be created at the origin and very, very small. We can see that here. If I press the F key in the perspective view, that is the light. Just like we don't want to scale cameras, we also shouldn't scale lights. Instead, we should use the light's attributes. Dolly back a little bit. With that directional light selected, go to the attribute editor, Control A, and we'll go into Object Display Locator Scale and increase that. I'm going to set that up to a pretty high value of about 50. All right, dolly back a little bit more. We want to position the light just for our own convenience, but the position of the light will not affect the lighting. A directional light is special. It comes from an infinite distance away from the scene, and so it doesn't matter where you place it. The only thing that matters is how you rotate it. In order to see the effect, you'll need to turn lighting on in 1 or more viewports. The camera view is the most important, of course, so go ahead and click in the camera view and then press the 7 key on your keyboard. And you will see at first something that looks a bit strange. The entire shot turns black. In order to actually illuminate this scene, we need to rotate the directional light down onto the scene. Select it and grab the rotate tool and turn it. You'll probably have better results with rotations for lights if you use world coordinates. I'll double click on that rotate tool, go to its tool settings and use world coordinates. Makes it a little bit easier. So you can see as I rotate this, we're getting different effects. We do need to see shadows in the viewport here because the shadow is a compositional element. I want to set up this shot so that the first frame and the last frame are identical. And in order to make that happen, we need to make sure that the shadows are out of frame on frame 1 and also on the last frame of the animation. So let's turn on shadows. That can be done from the menu here. Lighting, shadows. And we'll see a shadow appear there. We can also do it from the panel toolbar, which once again I've hidden. Control-Shift-M to turn it back on again. And you'll see there's a button here to enable or disable shadows. Alright, so if we scrub in our timeline, we will see, okay, on frame 1, I don't see any shadow. If I go to the end of my animation, which is frame 30, shadow is still almost in the frame, and I really need to make sure that it's out of frame. Okay, so to do that, I can just go back to my animation, make a slight adjustment to the X position of the ball. Select that ball. Go back to the graph editor. Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. Translate X and press F to frame. And here is the position of the ball at frame 30. I just want to move that up a little bit. Grab the Move tool. And hold down Shift to constrain the movement to vertical and drag up. I just want to shift that over a bit so that that shadow is no longer anywhere near that frame line. Cool, that was easy. All right, so we've got a really hard key light now. Let's do a render of this. So position my ball somewhere around frame 12 or so, and then render this shot, render this particular frame. Select the camera view and do a test rendering. Here we can see that we've got a very hard black shadow. We want to soften that shadow up, and we also want to add some ambience to the scene. Let's go to the light attributes. Select the light and hit Control A. Get the attribute editor open. First thing I would want to do actually is adjust the color here. Instead of pure white light, let's give it a little bit of a warm color. So I'll click on that color swatch. Set the hue to kind of orangish. Just a little bit of saturation, not much, maybe a value of 0.1. And now that's a bit warmer. All right, and then we also want to play with shadows. Open up the shadow section. There are two types of shadows in CG. Depth map shadows, which are pixel based, and ray trace shadows, which are vector based. And ray trace shadows look better, but take longer to render. I'm going to scroll down and find the ray trace shadow attributes section, and it's on by default for new lights in Maya. The relevant attributes here are the light angle and the shadow rays. Light angle will adjust the amount of spread. That'll give us soft shadows. And shadow rays is the quality. Let's do a region render here. I'm going to adjust the light angle to a value of 1. Press Enter. Drag a rectangle in my render view and click Region Render. Now I've got a little bit of a soft edge there. I can set that light angle up to a higher value. Let's try 5 and do a region render. Now it's really soft, but you'll see it looks a bit grainy. Let's zoom in on that with a mouse wheel. So that grain is being caused by the shadow rays being only 1. Let's increase the shadow rays to, let's say, 10 and do our region render again. And it takes longer, but it looks better. So now we've got a lot less grain there. Okay, I don't actually want it to be that soft. The light angle of 5 is too great. I'm actually going to set it down to a value of 0.5 and region render once again. Maybe a little bit more than 0.5. Let's give it a value of 1. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'll do a full rendering here and then store that image so I can compare it, because I also want to add an ambient light. That rendering took almost 15 seconds for that one frame, and it's because we have the ray tracing. We've got ray trace reflections as well as ray trace shadows. I'll store that image, and now I'm ready to create an ambient light, and that's going to fill in all these dark shadows here and make it look like it's actually in an environment. Go to the Create menu and choose Lights, Ambient Light. Now the ambient light only works with the Maya software renderer, so if you do end up using another renderer such as Mental Ray, you won't be able to take advantage of the ambient light. You'll have to use a point light instead. But since I'm rendering in Maya software, I can use the ambient light here. Click on that. It gets created at the origin. This one does need to be moved. The position does affect the lighting. I'm going to move it off to the other side, so it's on the opposite side from the directional light. So its rays of light will be coming from a different direction. Dolly back in the front view, and it needs to be moved up. So that's our skylight. And with it still selected, go into the attributes, Control A. And you can see here it's overlit in the viewport here. We need to reduce the intensity. I'll bring that down to a value of 0.5. And also change the color. Let's give it a cool color like the sky. Set it to a very desaturated blue and push slightly towards cyan or green. And then we also have the attribute here, ambient shade. That's the directionality. If ambient shade is set to 0, then the light is coming from everywhere and nowhere. And really you're just brightening up all of the dark pixels in the shot, and there's no directionality whatsoever. Let's see what that looks like. Do a quick render of ambient shade value of 0. So here it is with the value of 0. We'll store that, and it looks a bit flat. Let's try it now with an ambient shade of 1 and render. If the ambient shade attribute is set all the way up to 1, then the ambient light acts just like a point light. It's fully directional. All right, so let's see the difference here. Store that image. There's ambient shade of 0. Ambient shade of 1. Neither one of those is what we want. We want something in between. We want the light to be partially directional, like it's coming from the sky. But we also want it to be scattered around. Let's split the difference here. We'll set ambient shade to 0.5 and test render. All right, cool. I think that's a pretty good result. We'll store that image. That's ambient shade of 0.5, ambient shade of 1, ambient shade of 0, and no ambient light at all. So definitely this one with an ambient shade of 0.5 is the good one. All right, that's a very simple lighting setup, but it looks pretty good. Thing to keep in mind with Maya lighting is that you're not trying to reproduce any kind of photometric effect. In other words, with standard lights in Maya, it's impressionistic. It's really an art and not a science, unlike in some other programs like 3ds Max where you have built-in photometric lights that exactly emulate the behavior of real lights. Maya doesn't really have that. Maya does have a system for physical sun and sky, but that requires mental ray, and that's a topic for another day. All right, so our simple lighting setup is finished, and we can go ahead and increment and save.